Well, good day to you. It is March the 3rd, and yes, you heard me correctly. It is March. It's in 2024, and it's already March. It seems like about a minute and a half ago we were starting the year out, and it's amazing how fast time has been going, right? I'm sure you have the same experience. And if you're new to this channel, I read from time to time, I read articles from Benjamin Creme's master, who wrote these articles. Benjamin Creme published them in the Share International magazines on a monthly basis. And a few of them that I've read recently, he talks about how time seems to be speeding up. And it's because the drama that just keeps coming one after the other, and just doesn't seem to stop. And it just seems to be from every corner of the planet, and even in our own world and our own life, just drama just keeps coming, it just doesn't stop. We are really in a pressure cooker now, and for most people, it leads us to be afraid, and we think that the world is about to end, but according to the masters, there is no truth to that. We are only at the end of an age and at the beginning of a new age. And unfortunately, it isn't the smooth segue between ages. It's been rough. And will probably continue to be rough for a little while until humanity learns to come together as one family. And it's only going to happen when we accept the principle of sharing, which will be suggested and advised by Maitreya. And countries will learn how to come together to solve the problems of the world. But it won't happen until nations learn to share. Maitreya says, without sharing, there will be no justice. Without justice, there will be no peace. And without peace, there will be no future. But anyway, I digress. My name is Gary Willing. I want to welcome you to Search for Signs. As I always like to do, I just want to point out that if you want to know more about Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom, you want to know more about their teachings and how they're going to be teaching humanity, look into it for yourself and investigate it. It's free. It just takes you just a little bit of time to do it. But if you look in the description portion of these videos, there are links that take you to websites that talk about this information. And like I said, they're all there and they're all free. I did put the most important website at the top because you can get the best information there, and that's the Share International site. So hopefully you'll do it at some point. If you want to come back and join the discussion, post your comments, post your questions in the comments section, or email me at searchforsigns@mail.com. And I want to start with Bio Mirror Infinity 9618. He said, I heard that Maitreya is coming from India. Well, that's kind of true, except for Maitreya's already come from India. And I talk about the masters coming into the everyday world. It's not saying that India isn't the everyday world, but where these masters lived in the Himalayas, it could be said that they weren't living in the everyday world. Now, I need to give you kind of a brief historical synopsis of humanity's history and the masters to kind of bring everybody up to speed on this. Humanity is a lot older than most anthropologists and scientists would believe. In fact, I think probably the oldest I've ever heard somebody say humanity was about 1 million or so years, which is closer than what most religious people would think, because most Christians think that humanity is about 5,000 or 10,000 years old. Ever since we started writing something down, that's when humanity kind of came on the scene. But that's not. They're really missing the time frame, and getting it wrong. But even those anthropologists who think that humanity is only 1 million years old are not going back far enough. According to the Ageless Wisdom Teachings, it's 18.5 million years old. That's how old humanity is and has been living on this planet. And ever since humanity started, there have been people looking over the evolution of humanity, guiding humanity. And these people are the masters of wisdom. They are perfected members of humanity, the kingdom above humanity, if you want to look at it like that, have been here guiding and directing humanity, stimulating our evolution, protecting humanity from itself and the mistakes that we can make that could be so dangerous that we could destroy life on planet Earth and those kind of things. And today is no different. But anyway, so since the dawn of time, they've been doing that. And about 100,000 years ago, there was an event that was kind of climatic. And it was a war that happened between the forces of light and the forces of darkness. And it ended ultimately in the destruction of Atlantis. And it happened about 100,000 years ago. And ever since then, these masters have been retreated and far away from the eyes of humanity, but still here teaching and guiding humanity, but indirectly through their disciples in the world. So since the last 100,000 years, our evolution has moved forward bit by bit by bit, much slower than it was even then, because these masters haven't been teaching humanity directly. And their work and the evolution of humanity has gone from them guiding us directly to their disciples doing it. And so anytime there was a man or woman throughout history that you can think of that helped humanity, and whether it was a lot or a little, were working with these masters, some little part of the plan of the masters. Most of the time they had no idea that they were doing it. It was just an inspiration that they had. They had a thought to paint in a certain way, or sculpt in a certain way, or compose music in a certain way, or come up with some political idea, a social idea, or some kind of teaching or spiritual idea, whatever it was that they did that helped humanity along, whether, even technologically, an invention or something like this, they were being inspired and guided by these masters. And they took credit for it. Humanity moved a little bit closer, a little bit, farther along, as it could be said, to the point where we are today. Now, these masters are now retracing their steps back into the everyday world. So we'll eventually see these masters, know who they are, know why they are here, have a better understanding of their teachings and what they mean for humanity, because the information of these masters has been long forgotten. Long forgotten. In fact, I would say the vast majority of 99% of humanity don't even have the knowledge of the word of the masters of wisdom, let alone any idea of the teachings of the masters. Now we do have a bit of their teachings that were written in religious texts like the Bible and so forth, but the dogma, the conditioning, the fanatical approach to these teachings has kind of you have to kind of weed through all of that to get to the true teachings of these masters. And they're all about the laws of life, really is what the teachings of these masters are going to be teaching humanity, and what they have been teaching us since the beginning of time is the laws of life. For instance, in the Bible, there are two examples of this. The laws of life, like the law of reincarnation and the law of cause and effect. And when Jesus talked about it, he talked about it very simply. He said, what you sow shall you reap. He was talking about one of the great universal laws that govern all of humanity, the law of cause and effect. And then when they talked about reincarnation in the Bible, he talked about it in a very casual way with Peter when Peter asked him about John the Baptist. He said, who was John the Baptist? And Jesus says, don't you remember what I said? He's Elijah come back again. He was talking about the law of reincarnation, because it can be said that John the Baptist was in a previous incarnation, Elijah was John the Baptist. And so he was talking about reincarnation, which eventually these masters will talk about those two great laws to the point where we'll have such an understanding of especially the law of cause and effect, that we will learn to live harmlessly with one another. Nations will learn to live harmlessly with one another, but we've forgotten those laws. That's why we have the world that we live in today. Now, these masters thought that it would be another 1,000 years or so before they could come back. And what hastened their return was that great war that happened in Atlantis 100,000 years ago between the forces of light and the forces of darkness, reemerged again during the time of World War I and World War II. And the Axis powers that represented the lords of materiality and the forces of darkness, the allies that represented the forces of light and the masters of wisdom, the allies defeated the Axis powers. They didn't destroy it, but they defeated it, and it marked a very crucial part of humanity's evolution, because it meant that the forces of darkness wouldn't influence humanity as much as they did and had been doing. So the masters could take a step forward to, even quicker than they thought they could have done because of that. But also, I think this was probably the real thing that brought them closer to coming into our everyday life, as they're starting to do today, was they saw as a very possible future, humanity could destroy ourselves because of the creation of the atomic bomb. And if you just saw the movie that came out last year, Oppenheimer, they talk about the creation of the atomic bomb. But because we invented that, we could destroy ourselves. So the masters had to come back quickly to guarantee that we would not be able to do that. So that is what we are today. And then what happened was, Maitreya said in June of 1945, he gave this through the then disciple Alice Bailey, and she wrote it down in the Alice Bailey books. But he said to her, he's coming back far sooner than most people could expect. And he said that humanity would have to do three things. A measure of peace would have to have been established. And I do think that the Marshall Plan, I talk about this, and there's a link in the description for the Marshall Plan that happened right after World War II, was humanity signaling to the masters that we were ready for peace, because it did bring about peace. It did bring about the principle of sharing, which was another requirement that humanity had to do in order for the masters to come back. The principle of sharing had to start to govern the minds of the world leaders of the time, which it did, because the United States took an excess of the resources that they had and gave it freely to Western Europe, and it created goodwill amongst those nations. Unfortunately, it wasn't done all over the world. It was just done for a little bit of time with a few nations, but it did bring about goodwill amongst those nations that typically were at war with one another. So that's the first two requirements. And then the third one, I got to give it to Maitreya. I don't see it, but the political parties around the world had to start to clean house. So a measure of peace, the principle of sharing had to start governing the minds of the world leaders, and the political parties had to clean house. Those are the three requirements that humanity had to do to signal to Maitreya that we were ready. And in July 19th, 1977, Maitreya said, that's it, I got to come back. Because if he hadn't come back, we would have destroyed ourselves. And so since then, more and more masters have started to enter the everyday world. But in the mid-70s, right before Maitreya came on the scene, I skipped this step, 5 masters entered 5 major cities. The first one in New York, and then one came into London, one in Geneva, Darjeeling, and then eventually into Tokyo. And then 2 more entered 2 more cities, one into Rome and the other one into Moscow. And then since then, other masters have started to enter major cities like Beijing, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Paris. Those are the ones that I know of so far. So maybe there are others, but that's where we're at as far as I know. So anyway, but thank you for the comment. All right. Now, the next question came from an email, and it wants to know the connection between Sai Baba and Maitreya. So Satya Sai Baba, if you don't know who he was a guru that had millions of devotees around the world, and he passed away I think it was the same year Ben passed away. And according to Satya Sai Baba, that was the second of 3 incarnations that he is going to have. And then the next one, I think, is probably, if he's not born yet, he will be born very soon. But he, according to Ben, was a cosmic Christ, not from this planet. Maitreya is actually came out of our evolution and achieved not only becoming the first of our humanity to become a master, but also, in a very rare case all throughout cosmos, embodied the love nature of God on a planetary level. Most Christ embody it on a cosmic level, and I don't know the distinction between the two, but other than the fact that we're doubly blessed. And you can go on YouTube and you can search, if you don't know who Satya Sai Baba was, and you can listen to his discourses and stuff. But some of the things I wanted to say that have really impacted me by what he said is, one of his devotees came to him and said, I want peace. And he said, get rid of I and get rid of want and you'll have peace. That was one of the teachings, to be detached, that kind of thing. And then the other one that he said that I thought was quite funny was a reporter, I think it was at one of his talks. And every time he gave a talk in India, there would be hundreds of thousands of people there. But he had devotees all over the world. And he said, what's that like to see all these devotees coming to see you all the time? And that are all over the world or something like that. And Satya Sai Baba looked at him and goes, out of all the people, I only see one true devotee. And all these people were just on edge, thinking that they were the ones that he was going to acknowledge was the one true devotee. And he looks at his dog and he goes, it's my dog. And if you're a dog lover, you know what I mean. That's your one true devotee. But anyway, he didn't want devotees. Just as Maitreya, when Maitreya is out known for who he is in the world, people I'm sure will try to be very devoted to him. And Maitreya will tell them the same thing that Sai Baba says is, don't be devoted to me, be devoted to helping the humanity and that kind of thing. But Satya Sai Baba did not want devotees, and Maitreya is going to be teaching us not to follow anyone, whether it's him or any of these masters or each other or whatever, but to be true to ourselves, So hopefully that helps. But anyway, thank you very much. But there is very much of a connection between the two, and I would suggest checking out some of the videos that Satya Sai Baba in some of his discourses and teachings. So hopefully that will help you out. Now, somebody else asked via text, actually, he has my number, so he texted me. He asked me, what were some of the... He asked me, he said, hey, Gary, I have a question regarding your last encounter or encounters with Benjamin Creme. I'm just curious if there were any parting words of wisdom he may have shared with you. He didn't share them with me, but from what I understand, his last words on his deathbed were love one another. And he was, I think, talking in reference to the Share International groups, the groups around the world that he came to know and love. And he saw, because he had warned the Share International groups back in the early 2000s about how he saw them becoming more of an organization, and he warned against that and all the criticisms that were going back and forth in this spiritual group, and that was his last and final suggestion, if you would, to love one another. Now, me personally, I talked about this in a video. I felt while Ben was alive, I never really had a very good relationship with him, where I felt like he and I were on friendly terms. Let me put it like that. I had driven him around a couple times in Atlanta, and at that point, he and I were kind of cool, and I really cherished those memories that I had with him when I was driving him around in Atlanta for the times that he gave a talk a couple times. But most of the time in the times that I saw him at the conferences in San Francisco, I never felt really that close to him. In fact, a lot of times I felt like he didn't really like me, but that was just my interpretation of him. But looking back on it as an older man, I would say that I was wrong. And I'm kind of embarrassed to think that I even thought that, actually. But the last thing that he said to me personally that really made so much difference in my life was just a simple word. It was the same thing as his dying words. He said, but what happened was, it was at the end of the weekend, it was on a Sunday, we were all gathered together and we were getting ready to leave, and he was hugging everyone. He would tell them whatever he told them and so forth. And I remember him saying something to somebody in a very affectionate way, and I thought to myself as I was walking out, keep in mind, he was totally blind. He could not see anybody and recognize them for their, he maybe could see blurs of them, but that was about it. And so he had no idea that I was there by sight, and I was walking out, and I was kind of going around somebody that was talking to him, and had his attention. And I just thought to myself, I said, he's not going to want to say anything to me. And right when I thought that to myself, he goes, "Where is Gary Willing? Gary Willing, where is Gary Willing?" Keep in mind, he could not see me. And I was standing as I was walking right around him, and I felt this hand grab my wrist and pull me toward him. And he hugged me and he said he loved me. He goes, "I love you." So it was his parting words to me personally that made such a difference to me. But he gets such flack from people who have no idea what kind of person he was. They have no clue. But, it's par for the course. It's part and parcel with the work of somebody who's on the level that he is. If you look at all the great people throughout history, when they came with this innovative idea or innovative invention or innovative spiritual idea, or in the case of Benjamin Creme, being one of 3 or 4 people who are bringing back to the everyday world the knowledge of the masters, they get maligned, they get all this, venom thrown their way and so forth by people, this vitriol by people. It is amazing how that happens. It just seems to be, historically, that's what happens. Hopefully it won't happen in the future much longer because we'll have a better understanding of the work of the masters and so forth. But if you look even at Jesus, that's what happened. Maitreya, most of the people who, actually all the people who talk smack on this channel about Maitreya, calling him the Antichrist, calling him all sorts of nonsense and nastiness, they've never heard Maitreya. They've never met Maitreya. They've never seen and recognized him on TV, but yet they're already preparing for it. You know what I mean? Because they already think that he's the worst of humanity. They think he's the Antichrist and those kind of things. But he is the highest that we could ever be as a humanity. Pure, adulterated love. It was the same thing that Jesus had to deal with. John the Baptist had to deal with it, just as Ben had to deal with people calling him all sorts of stuff. Thankfully nobody had tried to assassinate Benjamin Creme. But that was the next step. I think if he had gotten more popular, they probably would have tried. You know what I mean? That just seems to be historically what happens. But anyway, hopefully that helps. Now I have a series of questions from Rosie33, and I have to say, sir, if you've listened to this video all the way through, you ask the most thought-provoking questions, and I really do appreciate all the questions that you've asked over the years. Where did you see or hear of the prophecy that all eyes will see him? And I actually found it, and it's Revelation 1:7. Look, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him, is the biblical quote. Let's see. Where did you read about that that we will hear what he has to say inwardly, and that he will give us 2 visions? Where exactly did you hear or read about that Maitreya will travel all around the world, and that no country will be left out? Good questions. They all came from Benjamin Creme's books. Those parts of it. The predictions that Maitreya we'll hear him inwardly in our own head came from when Benjamin Creme talked about the Day of Declaration. And if you go to the Share International site, you can actually watch videos of his lectures, and he talks about it at the lectures. At the end, he talks about the Day of Declaration, and gives an idea and a little inkling of what will happen. But the Day of Declaration will happen when humanity is so ready to hear what Maitreya has to say, that Maitreya will speak to all of humanity at one time. We will demand from our news media him an opportunity to speak. It won't come from the media. It's going to come from humanity demanding that he be given an opportunity to speak to us. We'll already have an idea of who this person is. Most of us who know this information will have a pretty good sense that is Maitreya, but we won't know because he will still be using his pseudonym, which according to Benjamin Creme he's already using on TV. He's using a common Middle Eastern name, something to the akin of John Smith, but Middle Eastern. But that's Maitreya, and he won't say he's Maitreya until the Day of Declaration. And according to Ben, when he goes to speak to humanity at this time, all the news media will be hooked up and linked for this one event. In fact, actually, Ben said that all the communication satellites are in and doing their job, and have been doing their job for the last few decades, for this one event to happen, so that it will fulfill the biblical prophecy, all eyes will see him, as it says in Revelation 1:7. And we will hear him, but what he says to us we'll hear inwardly in our own head, in our own language. Now, this is everyone above the age of 14. This will have this experience. So if you're Filipino, you might hear it in Tagalog. If you're English, you'll hear it in English. If you're French, you'll hear it in French, Japanese and Japanese, Russian and Russian, Ukrainian and Ukrainian, or whatever, right? Whatever language is your the easiest for you to understand, you'll hear it inwardly in your own head in that language. And we'll all hear the same message, but just in our own language. And that way there won't be any misunderstanding, I guess. Now, from what I understand it, from what I'd heard Ben talk about, he said that he will give us a vision of the past of humanity, how far we've fallen to the depths of materiality of the world today. And that if we continue on much farther, much longer, and don't change our ways, we will destroy ourselves. That's the vision he will give us. And we'll see our only planetary home from the Master's point of view end. But we'll also see a future if we just accept the principle of sharing. What would that be like? We'll start to see humanity coming together, nations coming together to work on the problems that are facing humanity. We'll see all this happen. We'll eventually get glimpses of the future of how beautiful it will be for all of humanity, not just a certain segment of society, but for every man, woman, and child on this planet. What would that be like? So we'll see both, and then we'll be able to make a decision or choice, which Maitreya will give humanity the choice. What do you want? Do you want a future where you die, where we all die, there will be no more life on this planet? Or do we just accept the principle of sharing, learn to trust one another, learn to bring about justice and peace, and eventually give us a future? What's the choice? Now, Maitreya is a little spoiler alert. Maitreya says he already knows the choice that humanity is going to make, and his heart is glad. So he knows that we're going to choose the right choice. We're going to make the right choice. But until this time, we're going to, there's always a possibility that we won't. And once we accept the principle of sharing, it will change life on planet Earth rather rapidly. Hunger will end. Poverty will end. Nations will trust one another in a way that we don't trust one another today, because that's what will happen with the principle of sharing. It will bring about trust. Just as I said in the, trying to address the previous comment about the 3 requirements that humanity had to do in order to, for the masters to come back in the everyday world. One was to bring about peace and the principle of sharing, right? The other was the cleaning up of the political parties. But the Marshall Plan, and this is the reason why I talk about it so much, is a kind of a beta version of sharing. And the end result was miraculous. It created goodwill amongst nations in Western Europe and with the United States, nations that had typically been at war with one another. But since the principle of sharing took place, and it only happened for just a little bit of time, unfortunately, it brought about goodwill amongst those nations. Those nations have not attacked one another since then. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned in a while is there is evidence of oneness on this planet, Razi 33, and that's the miracle signs that have been going on, that have been happening to all people of all walks of life throughout all nations and religious beliefs and people of no religious beliefs. But I think more importantly, the problems of the world, the environmental problem, for instance, is calling forth humanity's unity. We have to solve it together. It's affecting each and every one of us together. And if we don't do anything about it, it will end life on this earth for everyone, without exception. It doesn't matter whether you have the best doomsday bunker out there, your life will be ruined and ended too, because there won't be any life left on this planet. So how could you survive? You know what I mean? But it will take the principle of sharing to bring about unity to some degree to be able to solve those problems. But that is the vision that Maitreya will talk about. But where I heard about it specifically, I read about it in Benjamin Creme's books, but I also heard about it from Benjamin Creme when he talked and gave his lectures in those kind of things. And you can read about it for yourself, and you can also hear about it in his lectures on the Share International site. Oh, right. And then Maitreya will travel, and this is coming from Ben too, will after the Day of Declaration, there will be a time when Maitreya will travel to every single nation without exception. He will travel all over the world. We will be able to see him in our own towns. We might not be able to get up close to him, but we'll be able to see him, in coliseums or theaters or whatever it happens to be, and he'll be able to speak to each and every one of us. We'll be able to hear him, perhaps ask him questions and those kind of things. But for the most part, we'll get to know him on TV and through our media, because that's what it's there for. It's not the media that we have and the way that we have it today is just as corrupt as every other institution on this planet, because it's all about the money, right? But eventually that same media, once it's, starts to take on its true role for humanity, humanity will learn from the masters through our media. But like I said, Maitreya's travels throughout the world will never stop, but he will visit each country initially, and then he'll eventually do it over time, and he might go to a certain, I don't know how it's going to look per se, but that's kind of how I imagined it. Hopefully that helps. But anyway, I thank you guys for your questions, and hopefully I answer your question, Razi. And like I said, I really respect your questions, guys and gals, and I love it when you guys ask questions. I love you guys. You guys take care, enjoy the day, and I look forward to putting up videos in the future. Have a wonderful day. Remember to take action and help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.